This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Have y'all noticed how sports betting is pretty much everywhere these days? Turn on any game, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, and you can't escape the commercials for sports betting from companies like FanDuel and DraftKings, sometimes with updated stats showing up mid-game to keep viewers up to date for those micro bets. It's a huge change from where we were just 4 years ago, when the Supreme Court made it legal for states outside of Nevada to set their own rules for legalizing sports betting. Earlier this year, Ohio became the latest to join 35 other states and Washington, D.C., who have legalized sports betting with age restrictions. By the end of 2023, we could see 3 more states join that list. As the sports betting craze makes a clean sweep across state legislatures, what I want to know is, how did sports betting take over so fast? And are there any signs at all of it slowing down? First, let's look at the main argument given for legalization, which was twofold. Proponents like the American Gaming Association, or the AGA, the trade group representing gambling companies, argued legalization could help curb illegal gaming while providing a huge tax revenue source for local governments. At first, major sports leagues were very wary of any associations with gambling after decades of high-profile scandals. But NBA Commissioner Adam Silver wrote a now-famous op-ed in the New York Times that broke the mold, siding with the AGA, arguing $400 billion in illegal gambling was already taking place anyway. That stat would also be cited by lawmakers trying to legalize betting in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. Keep that $400 billion figure in mind. We'll get to that later. The AGA recommended states impose a relatively low 10% tax on the revenue for gambling companies to encourage faster growth. In exchange, they predicted state governments could make hundreds of millions of dollars in new revenue. So, 4 years later, was that actually the case? Let's take a look at what's happened since the 2018 SCOTUS ruling. States were so eager to get gambling operations online, few regulations or even rule enforcements were put into place. Some states let companies begin operating before full reviews of their practices were finished. In Iowa and Tennessee, companies let gamblers add money via credit cards, even though the states had outlawed such practices. Louisiana State University partnered with betting companies and encouraged students to place bets, even though gambling is widely illegal for anyone under 21 in Louisiana. The AGA introduced its own code for responsible marketing and claims to self-regulate. The code includes things like no marketing toward underage audiences or irresponsible betting. A New York Times investigation found most states didn't provide much more enforcement than this. In New Jersey, for example, regulators initially wanted to review all ads, but gave up after 2 years from too many ads coming through. See, it's not just you. Even the regulators are getting overwhelmed with ads. But in exchange for giving the industry a very, very long leash, many states haven't been seeing the revenue numbers estimated. Some state revenues have been as low as half of what was estimated by the AGA. There were a few states that overperformed after ignoring the association's advice. New York set a high tax rate of 51% on gambling company revenues and brought in a whopping $500 million in revenue just within the first 10 months of 2022. That made up half of all sports betting tax revenues combined nationwide. And that $400 billion in illegal gambling, it's not too clear how much of a dent legalization actually made. That same New York Times investigation mentioned earlier found the number didn't stand up to much scrutiny. The NBA and AGA cite a 1999 report to Congress about the harms of gambling, which put the estimates of illegal betting anywhere between $80 billion and $380 billion. One economics professor who admitted regretting citing the same figure in his own paper told the Times the number is pretty much pulled from the air. As the legal fight was first unfolding, 60 Minutes Sports interviewed 2 former illegal bookies, both with mob ties, on how legal betting could overtake the illegal scene. Both had similar responses.
They won't take it over. They won't even put a dent in it.
Because the guy that has no money in his pocket, that's betting on the come, is still going to call the local bookmaker to bet. Because he could bet with no money.
Let's be clear, sports betting is undoubtedly a huge market facing a meteoric rise. There's clearly tons of demand for legal betting. A Pew survey found a fifth of all US adults say they bet money on sports in 2022, just 4 years since legalization. But as tax revenues fail to live up to that initial hype, states may reconsider giving gambling companies such free rein. All eyes will be on how the sports betting industry and new sports betting companies navigate the ever-shifting landscape. After charting through the boom of the sports betting industry in the US, we wanted to take a second and talk with someone who's working in it now and helping create a new platform for the growing sports betting community. Nick Yale is the co-founder and head of content at Book It Sports, a new social platform dedicated to sports betting, and also a fellow Mizzou grad. Nick, first and foremost, MIZ.
ZOU, baby.
I'm glad we got that out of the way. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Let me take you back here just a little bit. When you were a sports reporter, when exactly did you start to see the tide shifting for the sports betting industry? And when did you finally realize this was a growing industry that you wanted to get into?
Being in sports, we always saw the opportunity for sports betting to be there, in a greater scale than maybe it was when we were in college. And kind of after I journeyed through TV and radio, I was looking at some new opportunities and started my own media business. And we started to see, a lot of investment dollars were really growing into the sports betting industry. And that's when we kind of had the idea of like, hey, maybe this is something we can pursue. And so that's been kind of neat to see just kind of the industry, while it's so young, only 4 to 5 years old, grow up in such a quick time. I think there was a lot of nervousness when people were dipping their toe in for the first time, whether it be the leagues or companies like myself, or athletes even. There was a lot of gray area, and now, those lines are becoming more defined, and they're seeing that they're both really fruitful partnerships, and they're able to do it in a safe way that I think promotes responsible gambling.
You personally, as a sports fan, how has being able to bet changed the way you watch games and the way you engage with sports?
Well, I would say I'm a lot more involved in, watching a variety of different sports, being a St. Louis fan, being a Mizzou fan, I have my teams, but I do find myself watching a lot more sports that I wouldn't necessarily watch, whether that's college basketball, like small mid-major games around here in Dallas, Texas, where we're based. Korean baseball was very big during the pandemic. Esports, like there's so many things that you can now bet on that you can find your niche. And so I think as a sports fan, it is fun to root for those teams that you may not have otherwise, even though if it's just purely for making money for yourself.
Let me ask this. Have you seen an interest in anybody betting on pickleball yet? Is that a thing that's happened?
I haven't, but I'm sure there is, and if it hasn't happened already, it certainly will in the future. That's for sure.
Some people have expressed concerns that betting might ruin the integrity of the game. What's your take on that line of thinking, and what kinds of impacts do you think the sports betting industry could have on sports themselves?
Well, I think it's always interesting to hear the takes. Everyone has their conspiracy theories, when it comes to games. I mean, for sports books, it's risk management. I think a lot of people look at the game like, it's skewed, it's flawed. We've even seen stories in the NFL, like Calvin Ridley, that had to sit out this year for betting on sports. Like there's definitely a lot of ways where it still hasn't, I think, completely been solved. But I do think the leagues and their partners have done a good job about mitigating a lot of that sketchiness when it comes to betting. But at the end of the day, I think sports betting is, just simply an addition to the game. Like there's always going to be a lot of money going around these games, both offshore and onshore with the legal sports books. I think it's only going to get better and better, and more laws, more rules are going to be put in place to make sure that the integrity of the game stays intact.
Yeah, for sure. Nick Yale is the co-founder and head of content at Book It Sports, a new social platform dedicated to sports betting. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today, my man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.